Welcome back everyone to Genshin Interact. As we are nearing the end of Sumeru and looking ahead to Fontaine, today we'll be discussing the upcoming characters and weapons on the second half of the 3.7 banners and whether or not they are a good pulling option for you. We are looking to make a Kazuha build guide soon, but we are not sure if we need an updated Alhaitham build guide. Please go check out the Alhaitham build guide on our channel and let us know if you would want an updated build guide going over him again, or if the one out now is good.
If you do enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in, such as other videos in the To Pull or Not To Pull series, build guides, or even our new series going over 4 stars.
Now, onto the video. The first character we're going to be looking at in this second half of 3.7 is Alhaitham. So Rift, what can you tell me about the team function and where he really fits in a team?
Yeah, so Alhaitham as a main on-field DPS, being Dendro, I see him really fitting in a lot of Dendro DPS teams. Anywhere you'd place normally Tighnari as the other alternative to a Dendro DPS. And I've even seen some people use Nahida as a DPS, but that is the role Alhaitham really fills, is a main DPS primarily. So being fit in this team, looking into his kit, we see that he ascends into Dendro damage bonus, and with his normal attacks, it's nothing really special in terms of the function, but they need to be upgraded because of the infusion that he gets, obviously being a main Dendro DPS. And the passive makes his charge even more necessary. Looking at Alhaitham's skill, Vixen, what can you tell me a little bit about that?
Alhaitham's skill gives Chisel Light mirrors depending on how many he already has on him. 2 versions of doing this is his press and the hold. The only real difference between the versions is the placement of where Alhaitham is really lunged or put. The press lunges Alhaitham forward in a short distance towards opponents, allowing him to kind of, do a quick instance where he doesn't have to focus too much. Usually you'll use this when you're in battle. Whereas holding the skill will allow you to aim a spot where Alhaitham teleports. This reminds me a lot of how Keqing uses her skill, where she uses her stiletto to go find a place basically and teleport there after you let go of the skill. Now looking a little bit more into how the Chisel Light mirrors work, if Alhaitham has no mirrors on him when he's activating this current skill, he'll gain 2 Chisel Light mirrors. But if he already has a mirror on him, either from a previous skill use and you've already had the 2 and then you lost one, if you already have a mirror on him, he will only gain 1 mirror from the skill instead of 2. So you can only really get up to 2 by using his skill. Alhaitham in this state will gain a Dendro Infusion or Dendro Conversion, meaning all of his normal, charge, and plunging attacks will be converted to Dendro damage. When hitting enemies with these Dendro Infusion, normal, charged, or plunging attacks, the Chisel Light mirrors will unleash a projection attack that does AoE Dendro damage. This damage scales off of attack, elemental mastery, but also how many mirrors Alhaitham is in possession of. Alhaitham can be in possession of a max of 3 Chisel Light mirrors at once, and this just means that he can have up to 3, and it really allows him to do a lot more damage in the state. 1 Chisel Light mirror will be removed 4 seconds after it's created. So just make sure to keep in mind that you're trying to keep up to 3 Chisel Light mirrors on Alhaitham at all times, which will make sure to keep your projection attacks very high in damage, as well as making sure you're doing as much and keeping that infusion on him as long as possible. When Alhaitham leaves the field, these mirrors will be taken with him, which means sadly no one will take a free Dendro infusion from him. Looking beyond his skill, his burst also helps a little bit with those Chisel Light mirrors, as well as doing a lot of damage. So Rift, what can you tell us about his burst?
Yeah, so Alhaitham's burst creates a field which deals AoE Dendro damage to opponents inside the field. Much like Keqing's burst, it really looks like it too, but basically just green. His burst will consume any mirrors he has on him when he casts his burst, and it will increase the number of damage instances inside this field based on how many mirrors he had. 2 seconds after using his burst, Alhaitham will either gain 1, 2, 3, or no mirrors based on the amount of mirrors consumed when using his burst. If Alhaitham has 3 mirrors when using the burst, the 3 mirrors will be consumed and he will gain no mirrors. If he has 2 mirrors, the 2 mirrors will be consumed and he will gain 1. If he has 1 mirror at the cast of the burst, this will be consumed and he will gain 2 mirrors. And if he has no mirrors when you cast his burst, he will gain 3 mirrors. Moving on to Alhaitham's passives, Vixen, what can you tell me about with that?
His first passive is basically when he uses his charged or plunging attacks that are hitting opponents, he will generate 1 Chisel Light mirror. But this can only occur every 12 seconds, 1 time. This is something to actually take use of a lot. You're trying to make sure that Alhaitham has as many Chisel Light mirrors on him as possible. That's how you're going to want to make sure to play him. He does take a little bit more thought process in making sure, looking at the light mirrors as well as focusing on your enemy, as well as focusing on the players in your party. So just make sure that he's going to be a character that's going to take a lot of thought process to make sure that a lot of different things are going on at the same time. Making sure that he has those 3 Chisel Light mirrors at once. You want to try basically to have no mirrors at the start of battle, using your skill to get 2, then using a charged or a plunge attack, usually a charged attack, to get the 3rd mirror, and then you can get a lot of those projection hits, as well as doing a lot more damage because of it. But his second passive states that each point of Alhaitham's elemental mastery will increase damage by projection attacks and his burst field attacks by 0.09%. The max damage increase that this can get this way is 90%. This means that the max elemental mastery to fully use this passive up is 1000 elemental mastery. I would not say to try to get near this 1000 elemental mastery thing, unless obviously you're just trying to just cuz, but I would say for a more permanent build, try to maybe stay around the 300 to 400 range with him. That's usually the best. Now looking beyond his kit, Rift, what can you tell us about similar characters to Alhaitham that can actually tell us whether or not we actually need him?
Yeah, so as I stated earlier, I kind of mentioned catching with how he feels as he plays out in the team. So looking back at their burst, they kind of have a similar feel. One's just Electro and one's Dendro. Obviously, Alhaitham's got a lot more complexity in his kit than Catching does. Catching's a little bit more straightforward, but Catching does, again, have the same skill and burst function, but she doesn't have that Chisel Light mirror whole idea going on in the kit. So she's simpler to use, but they are similar in how they play. It's basically Catching's aggravate side of Quicken teams, and Alhaitham is the spread side of the same reaction. But both DPS characters, they both like to be on field, and they love elemental mastery, especially with things like Hyper Bloom, Aggravate with Catching, and as a damage dealer in spread with Alhaitham. And then also I think of Kaveh, just because the Dendro infusion that Kaveh can get with his burst. He's also a Dendro on-fielder, but he's a little bit better built for Bloom, since his kit kind of fulfills that, and he also heals when he gets hit by Bloom explosions. But beyond that, there's not too many similarities. It's just that both having a infusion, being Dendro, does make them similar, and you can build Kaveh for personal damage if you so desire, in which case you won't necessarily need Alhaitham. But moving beyond talking about Alhaitham, we're going to also look at Kazuha. Vixen, what can you tell me about Kazuha?
Well, the first thing we want to look at, like we did with Alhaitham, is his team function and where he really fits in the team. And thankfully, this character, among a very select few, is such a character that can be fit on any team. He's an off-fielder, and if you really want to, he can be built on-field if you're going for personal damage and trying to make him the DPS of the team, but he can still do crazy amounts of damage off-field. He's going to be a Viridescent user, obviously taking advantage of that 4-piece ability, and then doing that, he's also going to have a passive that helps for supporting teammates. All of what he's doing is supporting the team that he's helping out. We're not only just going to say that, but we're going to look at his kit to see how he actually fulfills that role. So Rift, what can you tell us about his kit?
Yeah, so looking at Kazuha's kit, he ascends into Elemental Mastery, and this is very beneficial because the whole idea of building and using Kazuha is to have a lot of EM. That way you're doing a lot of swirl damage, but also giving EM to your teammates, kind of like how you would build and play Sucrose. His normal attacks don't have any special abilities or mentions, but looking at his skill specifically, first off, his skill will pull objects toward him, and then he will suspend himself and small opponents up in the air, dealing AoE animo damage. And there are 2 versions that you can kind of go about this. There are like 2 different routes you can go. Just pressing it will lightly pull and suspend enemies, and this can be used in the mid-air. And then if you hold the skill, it'll be a larger AoE than just the press, and more animo damage. Also, when you suspend yourself in mid-air by either pressing or holding the skill, Kazuha has 10 seconds where he can perform a plunging attack known as Midare Ranzan. When he performs this Midare Ranzan plunge, he will create a small wind tunnel that pulls nearby objects and opponents alike. This is also considered plunging attack damage, so if you want more personal damage and swirl damage for Kazuha, be sure to upgrade his normal if you so desire. But moving on from his skill and looking at his burst in that part of his kit, Vixen, what can you tell us about that?
Well, Kazuha's burst deals an AoE animo damage slash, first and foremost, and then creates a field that periodically deals AoE animo damage to opponents inside the field. If this burst periodic hits come into contact with Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or even Electro, it will change the periodic animo damage hits to that element and will deal additional damage of that elemental type. So basically what this means is that he swirls whatever element is inside of this huge animo swirling field. Whatever element it swirls, this element will then change the color and obviously the damage that it will be constantly hitting inside this field. Looking beyond his regular talents, Rift, what can you tell us about his two passives?
So looking at Kazuha's first passive, this says that if Kazuha's skill comes into contact with Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, the skill will also absorb that element. And inside of this, the Madare Ranzan hit will deal an additional 200% attack of the absorbed elemental type as damage rather than straight Anemo damage. And then moving on to his second passive, it says that when Kazuha swirls, every point of Kazuha's elemental mastery will grant all party members a 0.04% elemental damage bonus to the element swirled for 8 seconds. And this is one of the most powerful things about his kit, and namely why people like to look at Kazuha, as well as also his personal damage and his burst. But this second passive is a big part of Kazuha's kit and what makes him stand out as an Anemo support. Also, about the second passive, multiple bonuses can be gained this way at the same time. So for example, if you happen to swirl both Pyro and Hydro, you will actually gain a damage bonus to both Pyro and Hydro collectively for 8 seconds. So moving on from his passives, we're going to talk about a few characters that kind of play similarly to Kazuha or who you'd use in the stead of Kazuha. And this will kind of help you decide if you actually need Kazuha, because say you don't have these substitutes, or you do, and that'll kind of help you mitigate where you want to spend your Prima Gems. And so Vixen, what's the first character we think of?
The first character we're going to be looking at is Sucrose, and her burst is going to be very similar to Kazuha's, as they're both going to be swirling the element and then changing basically their damage into that specific element. Sucrose increases elemental mastery when swirling and using her burst, while Kazuha increases elemental damage bonus for teammates based on his elemental mastery. So they do something similar, but almost in a different way, as well as Sucrose is more helping other characters get elemental mastery when swirling and using her burst, as well as she's going to be a viridescent user, just like Kazuha it usually is, and Kazuha will increase elemental damage bonus using his elemental mastery. So a little bit difference of how those two kind of go about buffing the team. The other character we look at that is very similar to both of these characters is Venti. He's going to be a viridescent user just like Kazuha and Sucrose, but Venti does a better job at pulling enemies together than Kazuha really can, but Kazuha is also the better buffer because of his second passive talent. Now, both of these characters are going to be most likely using a 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set, which means that they both get the same set ability. But because of Kazuha's second passive, this makes him the better buffer, but Venti's burst pulls enemies together so well and helps your entire team do more damage to something that is very close together and they can't really attack you, whereas Kazuha is constantly hitting them. If you have Sucrose and you're thinking that you've gone higher investment into her, she may be worth it to then skip Kazuha, but I would definitely take a heavier look at if she is necessary, and if you're looking at Spiral Abyss, maybe trying to get Kazuha as well for the second team. If you have Venti and Sucrose, Kazuha is not necessarily a necessity on your account, just because both of these characters can already give you that viridescent buff, and that's the main thing that you're looking for. Everything else in Kazuha's kit is kind of just extra quality of life. It's very helpful and very good, and I would say to pull, but it's not necessary. Now, besides looking at the two characters on the banner, we're going to be looking at the weapon banner with Light of Foliar Incision and Freedom Sworn. Rift, what can you tell us about Light of Foliar Incision?
Light of Foliar Incision has a main stat of 88.2% crit damage when it's at level 90. And we're going to discuss a little bit of the abilities on this weapon, all at Refinement 1, so keep that in mind as we talk about this. This weapon will give you 4% increased crit rate, just flat out. Also, after normal attacks deal elemental damage, the equipping character will gain the Foliar Incision effect. This effect increases damage dealt by normal attacks and elemental skill by 120% of elemental mastery. The effect will disappear after 28 damage instances, or 12 seconds, and can be gained every 12 seconds. So obviously, looking at Alhaitham, this is his weapon. This is amazing for him with a very high crit damage stat. Obviously, the ability giving more normal attack damage, especially when you're doing elemental damage, and that's kind of, that's what Alhaitham does as a Dendro DPS. He's always constantly throwing out Dendro damage. So obviously, really great for him. There's a lot of other characters that this could work really well on just because it's a crit damage main stat, and it says that it's giving normal attacks that deal elemental damage a big buff, basically. So this works for a lot of characters. Catching, Ayato, any other sword characters that are getting an infusion, Ayaka. High crit damage is important on this weapon for Ayaka if you're using especially the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer, because that's going to help a lot of her crit rate needs, as well as also if you're using her in a freeze team. You know, you're going to get a lot of crit rate naturally, not even to mention if you're using Rosaria. There's a lot of ways you can get crit rate, but the skill and normal damage increase is very valuable. But the one downside is the elemental mastery side of things, where Ayaka doesn't really want a lot of elemental mastery unless you're using her in a specific build for like a melt team. But that is the one downside to using Ayaka. Looking at catching, with catching on a lot of Dendro teams, she is built on elemental mastery usually already, and she does play a very similar kind of role or playstyle to Alhaitham, so throwing this on her is not a bad idea at all. But moving on from Light of Foliar Incision, there's also another sword called Freedom Sworn, which is Kazuha's weapon. What can you tell me about that, Vixen?
Well, the main stat is going to be Elemental Mastery with 198 of it at level 90, and we're going to be also looking at the abilities at Refinement 1. This weapon gives the Millennial Movement effect. This effect increases damage by 10% straight out. When the equipping character triggers an elemental reaction as well, they gain a Sigil of Rebellion. A Sigil of Rebellion can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds, and when the equipping character is also off-field. When the equipping character possesses 2 Sigils of Rebellion, the 2 sigils will be consumed, and all nearby party members will obtain Song of Resistance. Song of Resistance increases normal, charge, and plunging attack damage by 16%, and increases attack by 20%. When Song of Resistance is used, you cannot gain Sigils of Rebellion for 20 seconds. Basically what this means is that you're going to want to be putting this on a character that's going to be creating a lot of elemental reactions to make sure you're getting as many Sigils of Rebellion as possible, to make sure that you can obviously get this normal charge and plunging attack damage increase and the attack percent increase as well, to do as much damage on or off field. Obviously the best characters for this, we're going to look at Kazuha first and foremost, because this is his own weapon. Obviously its main stat going to be Elemental Mastery, helping not only his damage and his swirling ability, but also his passive talent that's going to help him buff his own teammates. Also, we're going to look at Nilou. It's good for its main stat of Elemental Mastery, very high, almost at 200, and it helps on-field Nilou's personal damage. This weapon could even be used on someone on a team with Nilou if you have a better weapon for Nilou. So if you have like the Key of Kajni suit for Nilou personally, and you already have her personal weapon, and then you're thinking, well, I kind of want to use this Freedom Sworn weapon I just got, you can always throw that on a character that's also on that team. And if you're personally looking at like a Hyper Bloom team and you have Kuki on that team, this is another good weapon for her, and it'll also help other team because this will be giving all party members that Song of Resistance, giving them the normal charge and plunging attack damage, making sure that on field Nilou is doing a lot of damage for you. The last character we're going to be looking at for this weapon is Catching. It's got a good main stat for Catching with 198 Elemental Mastery with the other characters obviously, and then its ability is going to help her amazingly well. And we're going to think about this specifically with a Dendro-specific team. Catching's been put on a lot of these teams recently just because of the amount of damage that she can do when put with characters just like Nahida, as well as this weapon will be buffing characters like Nahida. Now that we've looked at the actual banners themselves, let's get to the actual parts that everybody wants to know in this video, and that is pulling options. What do we need to actually figure out on whether do you need these characters or do you not? The main question of the video is, should you pull or should you not? So the first question we're going to be looking at is, do you need an on-field DPS or an off-field support character on your account? In Rift, how can you answer that?
So looking first at Alhaitham, this is that on-field DPS mentioned in the question. Yes, he's a great on-fielder, especially with all the hype and damage that Dendro teams can output, especially if you have Electro supports like Yaimiko, who is still available right now. Also, having a relatively low investment with high output, you don't have to do too much to make Alhaitham really good, and that's something valuable, especially as a DPS for your team. Not to mention that Dendro teams, like just a simple aggravate or spread team, they're just easy to use and easy to build around. Obviously though, if you already have an on-fielder that's dealing Dendro damage, say you're using Nahida as an on-field damage dealer, as opposed to her more typical support route, if you did pull Alhaitham in that instance, you would obviously make Alhaitham your account's on-field Dendro DPS, and maybe you can rebuild your Nahida to be more of a support. But if you also have Tighnari, you can safely skip Alhaitham because Tighnari is going to be not as good as Alhaitham, but he does the same role as a Dendro DPS. It's just going to feel a lot different. Obviously, we're going from a sword to a bow user, so it's going to feel very different, kind of like the difference between Hu Tao and Yoimiya. Same role, but very different playstyle. But then looking at Kazuha for the off-field support character on the other side of the banner, He's an amazing support, one of the best in the game, and he can be used on-field, but preferably he's more of an off-field support if you just build him the more typical support route with 4-piece Viridescent and giving EM and damage bonuses to your team. So it really just comes down to, do you need that? Do you already have that in Sucrose or Venti maybe? And if so, you could probably skip and save your Primo Gems, or maybe you just really want Kazuha that badly for his second passive. That's something for you, the player, to figure out and kind of weigh the options between your account. Looking at the second question, we ask, what elements is your account in need of? And Vixen, what can you tell me about that?
Well, if you kind of feel like you need a little bit more Dendro, or maybe you want a pair for Nahida, Alhaitham works really well with her. The only other on-fielder for Dendro is Kaveh, and although Kaveh is good, Alhaitham is just such a good character that it's really hard to compare the two, especially since Alhaitham's going to be helping a lot more than just Bloom teams. Kaveh's a great character at the end of the day, but he really just fits inside of that Bloom team as much as possible just because his kit reinforces it over and over again, whereas Alhaitham's a little bit better for multiple different specific teams. We believe Kazuha is one of the very select few characters in Genshin that if he comes by on a banner, he is usually a must-pull. Kazuha's entire kit focuses on supporting the DPS on most teams and is almost never a detriment to an account. That being said, I did just use the words usually and almost, because if you are low on Primo Gems, or are waiting for other characters, or if you're just waiting for Fontaine to come out with other new characters, well-built characters like Sucrose or Venti, the ones we talked about, will be just fine for now in place of Kazuha. The next question we're going to look at is, do you have the resources to properly invest into the character that you have pulled? And Rift, what can you tell us about that?
So although Sumeru can be grinded for materials on friends' accounts, or begrudgingly just walked to across Tivat to get the materials, you should try to get to Sumeru in the story just to have, a better experience of material gathering, and so it's not as tedious as it might already seem to be. And in Kazuha's case, he takes a lot of Inazuman materials. Now, this is even more important because Inazuma is strictly locked by a story quest, so make sure you know that it will take some time grinding if you are not there yet to get the materials you need for him. But looking at our next question, we ask, what kinds of teams are you, the player, trying to build either right now or for the future? Vixen, what can you tell us about that?
Well, Alhaitham will open up many different opportunities for different Dendro teams on your account, or maybe he's just going to open up more avenues for other Dendro teams, just in general. Whereas Kazuha will fit on most any other team because of his kit mainly helping Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, and Electro teams, as well as the Viridescent buff to those same elements, because all of these elements can be swirled. And so because of this, Kazuha is a little bit more free range and very versatile, whereas Alhaitham obviously sticks to his specific Dendro-specific teams. He doesn't have that much energy usually usage because you're trying to make him the DPS, so most people are going to be trying to pair him with another Dendro, forcing him into that Dendro-specific teams that they kind of focus around, Hyper Bloom, Spread, all these other different things. The next question we look at is, looking at your personal account, what roles do you have filled, or what roles do you not have filled, and how can these characters either fill the roles that you don't have filled, or maybe even help those roles that you already have filled? Rift, what can you help people see kind of with the roles that they need filled or not filled?
Right, so Alhaitham may be necessary to open up Dendro on your account and be helpful to build a team around him, especially since you can pair him with a free Kale from the Spiral Abyss. Kazuha is a great flex spot, meaning if you have 3 characters for a team and just need a buffer or a placeholder in that 4 slot for extra damage, really Kazuha is one of those S-tier options for that 4th spot. Moving on to our next section, this is where we like to weigh the dangers, from new players, free-to-play players, veteran players, and even whale points of view. This is where we're going to weigh the dangers and kind of see what may be different about why you should pull for a character or why you should not pull for a character. And at the end of the day, remember that that's always your decision. What you decide to do with your Primo Gems is your decision. So we're just here to kind of help you make that decision on, do I want this character or do I not? So first off, looking at kind of a free-to-play player kind of perspective, Vixen, what can you tell us about that?
Well, free-to-play players need characters that slot into multiple different types of teams and a plethora of different teams, and make the game easier for them before the late game really tends to kick in, which is where we believe both of these characters are really going to fit. Alhaitham is great to have, and as said earlier, is great to pair with Kale, who can be gotten for free via the Spiral Abyss. He'll be a great addition to any account, especially since we try to tell people that you want to focus on finding a DPS and then actually circling the entire team around that DPS with a bunch of different supports, with 4 stars usually, and then getting 5 stars later in the game. Kazuha is the same and probably even better. Kazuha is such a great character that can fit into so many different teams that he's useful on any account. It does not matter if you already have Venti or you already have Sucrose. We said that you don't necessarily need to pull him, but he is never going to be a detriment at the end of the day to you if you decide as a free-to-play player, I need Kazuha, and let's say you don't have Venti because you're newer and, you know, he hasn't been around maybe in a little while, or maybe you haven't really got the gacha love to really get Sucrose at this point in the early parts of the game, and, you know, the 4 stars have not been lucky to you and you have not gotten Sucrose. Now you can finally take all those Viridescent pieces, maybe even using the Strongbox, to make Kazuha a great fit for your team. Looking beyond free-to-play players, newer players, we're going to look at veteran players, whether you're free-to-play still over the years, or maybe you've decided to give in a little bit to the gacha love and pay a little bit as well. So Rift, how can you help these people kind of see what they need for these 2 characters?
Yeah, so veteran players, you should already, like Vixen was saying, you should already have a decent lineup by now, and you'll possibly have, you know, like 2 4-person teams for the Spiral Abyss at this point. And if not, that's still okay. You know, but with all the Bloom and Dendro reactions buffs in, you know, recent Spiral Abysses, Alhaitham might just be what you need to excel and get those 36 stars. If you don't already have Kazuha, why not go ahead and get him? You've probably heard time and again that he's great for any account, even by us multiple times in this video, but that's because he is and will help your account in more ways than you can even think of. If you can't even go after his C1 or C2, that wouldn't necessarily hurt you either. His C2 is one of the best constellations in the game. But moving on to our high spender kind of point of view, Vixen, what do you have to say about that?
Well, if you're looking to maybe go a little bit more beyond than other people and looking into constellations, whether you're a high spender or if you're just looking straight up at constellations, you maybe need to kind of focus as a general rule what good constellations there are, other than the C6, of course. What you want to look at is your C1, your C2, and possibly your C4, but mostly that first and second constellation are going to be game changers for you. Alhaitham 6 constellation is very good and is probably the best, but if we're looking at his early constellations, you want to focus on the second. This constellation increases his elemental mastery by 50 and has 4 stacks that go up to 200 extra elemental mastery, which boosts his damage since he's going to be scaling off of elemental mastery as well as attack. Kazuha is the same way with his second constellation. This is the one you want to look at here. When using his burst, he gives himself 200 elemental mastery, which boosts not only his personal damage, but his buffs to others because of his second passive talent, but as well as it gives all the party members in the burst field 200 elemental mastery. So if you want that 200 elemental mastery buff, Kazuha is going to get it wherever he is. All the party members that are inside of that burst field of Kazuha's are going to get 200 elemental mastery as well, helping their personal damage as well. This is going to make Kazuha the next tier and the next level to absolutely break basically any reaction team. The final question we're going to look at is, do you actually need the weapon? So Rift, how can you maybe look at the weapon banner and tell people, do they need this weapon for each character or not, or for other characters?
So Alhaitham works best with his personal weapon, obviously, but he has many 4-star weapons like Tokubo Shigure, Black Sword, and Iron Sting that will help him out. Never mind the large arsenal of 5 stars that he can use like Primordial Jade Cutter, Mistsplitter Reforged, and plenty more. Looking at Kazuha, you know, he kind of further shows himself as a great and versatile character since he works well with so many 4-star swords like Iron Sting, Tokubo Shigure, Zephos Moonlight, and more. It all just depends on if you want damage, more energy for his burst, or elemental mastery to become better at buffing the teammates. We hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or weapons coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help others, go ahead and let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.